Panty and Stocking is a series that initially one can seemingly take at face value. It's an anime inspired by Western cartoons, and so it's easy to assume that that's the entirety of the show. However, further examination reveals that there's a lot more to this show than meets the eye. In particular, how it takes the idea of a Western cartoon and transforms it via the staff's anime perspective. Before diving into that, I should clarify in what specific ways Panty and Stocking mimics Western cartoon aesthetics and writing styles. There are the obvious bits, like how the overall design sense is much more cartoony and simplified than a typical anime, thus creating a more abstract world for the characters to interact in. The series is also mostly episodic, with each half-hour block divided into 2 episodes that stand apart from each other, and the notion of continuity is treated more like a guideline than a hard rule. As for direct influence, one of the show's writers, Hiromi Wakabayashi, specifically cited Drawn Together as one of the many inspirations for Panty and Stocking, thus contributing to the show's crass and outrageous nature. There are also many more subtle ways that it integrates a more cartoony aesthetic, one of my favorites being the episode title cards. Title cards are a rarity in anime but are extremely common in Western cartoons, and so incorporating them into Panty and Stocking further reinforces said cartoon aesthetic. As a side note, these title cards are absolutely indispensable if you're someone who loves cataloging the specifics of your favorite animators and writers, since they tell you exactly who worked on each episode, allowing you to more fully dissect their styles. Even its controversial post-credits scene has its roots in American media. According to the creative team, Panty and Stocking had plans to be more than 1 season, or at least they had enough material for it. Had Imaishi stayed at Gainax and the series continued to fare well in the market, a 2nd season could have been very likely. However, because Imaishi and his core staff left to form Studio Trigger less than a year later, the project was indefinitely shelved. Now, I don't know about you, but I need at least 2 hands to count the number of Western cartoons that fully promised to deliver on another season, and still ended up getting cancelled for one reason or another. So even this element of Panty and Stocking falls in line with a more Western style of writing. Yet, despite the details being painstakingly accurate in many instances to the Western aesthetic, the core of the series, in particular how it is structured on an episode-to-episode basis, is remarkably different from the average cartoon. Much like any other medium, cartoons tend to develop a habit for consistency of genre and presentation across each episode. While this isn't quite as true as it used to be, with shows like Adventure Time and Steven Universe embracing a more diversified style of writing, many cartoons, especially those that follow the same half-episode format that Panty and Stocking imitates, had a certain consistency to their presentation. Every episode is mainly comedy-focused, usually around a single premise or gag, which allows audiences to solidify a set of expectations when going into a new episode. Panty and Stocking, on the other hand, decides to opt out of this strategy in favor of having more variance to the writing styles and structures of each episode. While the majority do stick to the comedy episode focused on a single premise format, plenty of episodes in the series have completely different and unexpected tones and structures, especially towards the end, and the degree to which each episode varies from the standard formula is just as unpredictable. The most obvious example of this is episode 5B, where the show takes on a much more realistic and fluid style of animation, and the genre changes almost entirely. On the surface, there's nothing outright comedic about this episode until the last few minutes. It's actually a fairly serious, almost depressing story about an aging salaryman, and this change in writing style is accented by the drastic shift in art style in order to draw attention to said shift. You could also argue that the entire plot of this episode is a bit parodical in nature, which adds even more layers of abstraction and unpredictability to the mix, but I think you get my point. Panty and Stocking likes to play with your expectations, which could be yet another reason for that infamous post-credits scene, but that's purely speculation on my part. Another interesting deviation present in Panty and Stocking is that the show's moral compass is basically non-existent. Normally, though not absolutely required, there's at least some attempt at putting a message together for each story in a Western cartoon. A point to the episode, if you will. Even in more adult-oriented shows. There's some sort of lesson imparted to one of the characters in order to keep the story from drifting into total mindlessness. Panty and Stocking not only sidesteps this idea completely, but often tosses it right in the trash in order to better execute the outlandish episodic stories the writers come up with. There are tons of moments where there is very clearly some kind of lesson that Panty and Stocking are supposed to learn in order for them to grow as characters, and the blatant presentation of these lessons is what gave me this idea in the first place, but they always end up ignoring it because everything works out for them anyway, so there's no need for them to grow or change, even in the last episode. In truth, there is one overarching message that the series tries to solidify by the end, that being Imaishi's long-worn message of "do not stand in the way of my personal freedom or I will put you down," that's present in basically all of his works to date, but I'd hesitate to say that this qualifies as the show having a quote-unquote moral compass. On the other hand, its presence in Panty and Stocking seems to take on an additional metatextual meaning as a result of the inconsistency of the show's episodic formula. That being, my vision cannot be bound to strict writing conventions, and I'm using this show as proof of that, which is probably one of the most Imaishi things I've ever seen. And that, I feel, is the most important idea to be drawn from this. That there is genuine heart, drive, and purpose that can be felt from this production. Imaishi and the rest of the staff didn't just make an anime that felt like a Western cartoon for the gimmick or because they thought it would appeal to a certain group of people. They made it because they saw something cool from American television and wanted to do their own version of it. And it's for this reason and many others that I think so highly of Imaishi and many of the other people he works with. To be so forthright and uncompromising in all of his productions is something that I absolutely love about him. And this makes me even more excited to see what he brings to the table in his upcoming production. Boiling Panty and Stocking down to "it's like a Western cartoon" removes so much of the nuance that makes Panty and Stocking great. And I hope I was able to convince you of that here. This video topic was selected by my patrons. As part of my Break the Backlog tier, those who pledge $3 or more will have access to a monthly poll in which they get to vote on what show from my backlog I will make a video about in the following month. So check out the link in the description below to further support my videos. Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourketon Joing, Christine Seibert, Tim Johnson, Call Me Catlord, Ember's fave roommate, Eugenio Mendoza, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.